everybody, and welcome to The Crunch with your hosts, Rebecca and Patrick. So it's been an interesting couple of weeks and a couple of days with earnings calls for Microsoft and others disappointing. It's ServiceNow came in strong. We got Five9 later this week, and then obviously Salesforce and Workday later this month. And Patrick and I have been talking a lot about the AI bubble that a lot of us have been talking about. You know, Patrick wasn't around for the cloud bubble or the .com bubble, and he's not really into following crypto. I watch Dogecoin. I don't think that is what you think it is, B. Anyway, but somebody who has watched all these trends and is certainly watching the AI bubble is our guest today, Jon Reed. Jon, welcome.
Well, hello, and hello, Patrick.
Hey, thanks for joining today.
No doubt, no doubt. I just, real quick, my coworkers might be mad at me because I'm supposed to be on vacation, but when I get an invite from you and Patrick together, sorry peeps, but I had to do this show, so.
Well, we're sorry to interrupt your vacation, but we hope this is just
no, it's worth it.
Week for you.
It was worth it. Had a little cosmetic cam set up in the hotel room, so if people don't like the perfection of my setup, just blame me. Brent Leary did his best to help, but.
Well, we appreciate you taking time on your vacation to join us. You know, I read your piece about sort of AI and what we can expect for the next part of the year. And given that everybody's talking about AI and the AI bubble, I thought it would be great for us to have a conversation kind of about what you're seeing. And one of the things you wrote about in the piece was talking about sort of AI dissonance and how there's sort of a data point for whichever side you want to be on of optimism or pessimism about we're going to be able to do with AI. And we're seeing that even, in our own data as well, where you've got, 40% of the workday is ripe for automation, but 25% of companies aren't ready, right? There's sort of stuff on either side. Where do you see this kind of going, and how do we reconcile that looking toward the end of the year?
Well, I think it is really difficult, right? Because there is this dissonance, and then to add to the complications of that, there's also a divergence, which I probably should have spelled out even more clearly in the piece with that term, between the consumer side of AI and the enterprise side. And the consumer side, crap hits the headlines every day about chatbot meltdowns and various misadventures, which unfortunately I think also cloud the perception of AI for enterprise buyers. And that puts enterprise vendors in a tough spot because they're trying to create a much more, I guess you could say, responsible form of this technology. And they have a bunch of architectural things they're doing to accomplish that, which I've written a lot about this year. So you struggle with that, right? And I don't know that there's any easy answers here because, like you said, the survey data is all over the place. I think what I'm going to be focused on in the fall is really looking for more and more project results and insisting upon that. And one of the difficult things about this technology is that there are definitely some productivity examples you can lean on. They may or may not be very exciting or sexy. That depends on how you feel about them. But this technology is friggin' expensive. And one of the big things that's changed even since I wrote that article is some pretty important research has been coming out on the energy consumption side of this. I think really raises the stakes as well in terms of like how we rationalize this. So that's what I'm going to be trying to do is figure out where the success is, and then can we speak to ROI yet, or are we still, right now the costs are getting externalized. Like for a while the market was taking care of those costs, and now I don't know who's taking care of those costs, but eventually they're going to get passed on to a customer. So.
Right. Yeah, and I want to go back to your point about kind of productivity, but there was somebody reached out to me this week and said that Gartner was saying that 30% of AI projects were going to be ditched in 2025. And I think that really spoke to your point about sort of what are we actually doing in terms of metrics, but also how rapidly things are evolving. I think probably 30% may be low, not because the projects aren't necessarily successful, because I think some of them are, but because the technology is evolving so rapidly that I'm going to want to move on to that next version of the Copilot or a smaller language model that's less expensive.
Yeah, and that's one of the really interesting enterprise sides of the story. I'm looking forward to writing about an interview or two I've done recently with startups that are more industrial AI, that are focused much more on smaller models. And unfortunately, it looks like even smaller models have some significant energy consumption. So the cost of smaller models can still be substantial, but they're more fit for purpose and they're easier to run and scale. And
Mhm.
so that's one of the things that we'll be looking at. But I was really struck by this summer because I was working judging a competition. I wrote about this a little bit in the piece because this piece was really my mid-year epic. So I try to put everything in there. It's really long, but
Great.
but one of the things I was looking at was I was looking at analytics and data use cases for this competition, and what I was struck by was that the ROI from what you might call classic AI deep learning projects, pre-generative stuff, along with analytics, the use cases were just very clear and substantial in terms of this is what we did, this is how much we saved, this is the impact it had. And then the generative AI submissions that came in were much fuzzier in terms of trying to figure out like what exactly is happening and how is it really benefiting from a financial perspective. There was a lot of language in there about empowering users to have better access to data. And I think that's a good thing, right? Because at their best, these types of generative AI interfaces are, in theory, more engaging to a typical user, right? Where you can kind of almost have a conversation, right? And say, hey, can you show me this? Can you show me that? And for a lot of users that have found analytics a little bit impenetrable, like I think that's intriguing, but that's not ROI. And that's happy talk at this point, and it's really expensive to run these queries and get these generative results. So I think it's going to be tricky this fall, and I think what vendors are going to do, and I hope I don't sound too cynical because I do think there's some generally cool stuff happening, but I think what vendors are going to do and what I'm afraid of is they're going to try to kick the can down the road by talking a lot about AI agents and whatever the next big thing is, which I saw on a show last week. Is this the next big thing? And it's like, can we just try to reckon a little bit with how to use this stuff instead of being like, oh, the next big thing, when in fact, like, it's very clear that we're running out of scale to make these systems better. I mean, Sam Altman has basically admitted as much, and OpenAI has postponed the release of GPT-5 again. So, there's not these systems are going to get better in different ways than that. And so it's time, I think, for vendors to start saying, here's some customers that are getting some good stuff done with this, and that's what I'm looking for. But I don't know if we're going to get it. I think we're going to get a lot of, oh, well, if this is an agent, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, your perspective on kind of the LLM, ServiceNow was early on talking about using smaller, more purpose-built models. Salesforce has been talking for a while about, the model is going to become the commodity and you're going to swap it out and that sort of thing. I don't know that I'm seeing that yet, but how do you think it evolves with the other sort of big vendors in these models? Did Microsoft make a mistake on going all in with OpenAI and ChatGPT?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be interesting, right? To what extent can they walk that back? And, I mean, the good news is that they have this margin for error because they're going to have so many AI workloads on Azure that's probably going to buy them a little margin for error. But, OpenAI is a bit of a crap show right now with a lot of senior leadership leading, and it's just really hard to say whether, when the smoke clears in a few years, are they going to be a dominant player, particularly in an enterprise context? I really have my doubts, but it is really interesting to look at vendors, because when you do a deep dive with these vendors, and I'm sure you've done some of these this year as well, they all have different approaches. Zoho spends a lot of time with smaller models. Some vendors are more focused, like Sage, for example, is really focused on industry-specific models. Mm-hmm. So there's all kinds of ways, but all it comes down to is this: it's a recognition that these systems need to work in the enterprise. They need to give better and more appropriate and accurate responses that are tuned to the customer's data, but that respect the customer's privacy and security. Right. And so that's what this is all about. And it's funny because I was writing about this sort of killer apps thing, because there really aren't any killer apps on the enterprise side yet, I would argue. I'm sorry, but meeting summaries are not a killer app. Sorry about that. And neither is like some amorphous co-pilot that may be coming out at some point to help you through. That's not a killer app. What is a killer app, ironically enough, is there is some stuff on the consumer side. One of the big killer apps, and I think it's instructive to look at this, is sorry for going off script here as far as what's appropriate for the show, but a lot of it is like very personal chat conversations, chat buddies per se, like Character AI that just got acquired by Google. That was all about basically semi-romantic interactions with these bots. Like, and Character was very like above board that this is not a place for adult stuff, right? But a lot of these bots are not appropriate in that sense. They go way off script. But the beauty of that is that it's a perfect use case because they can scale, they can engage, and if they're not 100% accurate, who cares?
That's right. That's right. You don't have to apologize for going off script.
But unfortunately, those, yeah. But I just don't know how far I want to go into like the once again, porn is leading the way as far as innovating around the economic model. But the fact is
about couches, I think we're okay.
Yeah, we're not going to go there. But anyway, so I think it's just really interesting because that I think is the biggest sort of killer app that actually has a monetization behind it, and also some stuff around SEO and content games and stuff like that. Neither of which really translate to the enterprise in a credible way, and so that's why we're sitting here saying, where is the real action here? And I do think there will be some cool stuff because as companies, again, I don't know if you hear this, but what I hear from customers is to get more used to these tools, they start to figure out what they could really do with it that would be cool, that would be really unique to them and really appropriate to their company. And I think that's what we're going to start hearing, but we might not hear so much of that this year. I think that might be more 2025. But
it's funny. One of our predictions for 2024, not to toot my own horn or anything, was that we're going to see a lot of disasters. And you mentioned some of the agents and bots. I mean, we've all heard the stories. Do you think we're going to hear a lot more about agent fails in the future moving forward?
Oh, for sure. Because, okay, so there's a couple different components to that, because one of it is what I call AI overreach, which is pushing these systems beyond what they're capable of or not designing them well. And it's one thing that I really find frustrating because it gives these bots a bad name. But if you design these bots well, and I've documented a couple of the use cases around support on Diginomica where design them well and restrict them to specific issues and resolutions, and they can really be of help. But the problem is that a lot of times it's like throw it out there and see you get all these outrageous stories from that. There's a bot for New York City businesses that's still online that continues to dispense illegal and questionable information, and they haven't bothered to take it down. And some companies are going to do this, and they won't necessarily pull back. You say, well, why wouldn't they pull back? It's like, well, because this rationalizes a headcount reduction, and they're going to go with it for a while and see if they can get away with it. And so you get these hilarious things of like out negotiating a dealer for a truck for $1, get the bot to name the price, and all this kind of stuff. We're gonna keep hearing that, but I think in some ways it's a little unfair to the technology. Now the technology needs to be designed very carefully when it's interacting directly with consumers, and there is the potential for error. But the thing is, with techniques like retrieval augmented generation, there's some things you can do to really limit the data part of the response to the customer's specific issues and questions. And so if you do this right, you can definitely get a better result, but the question still comes back to, did this save me money? Did I build additional revenue source, or what did I do with it? I mean, ideally this is going to make your humans freed up to do more cool human stuff, like VIP relationship type stuff, or higher level support, or maybe even sales and upselling as part of that role. I mean, this is what we've wanted all along, is to have a human and machine environment that's empowering that plays to the strength of both. It's just that I don't think we have that right now.
Well, you bring up a really interesting point. I don't know if you saw, Lattice got a lot of blowback recently for an announcement they made about digital employees and being able to manage a digital employee next to the real human employee.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And I think the language was really unfortunate, because the language matters when we start talking about this stuff and people are worried about, losing a job. But I think there are a lot of important conversations that Lattice was starting that aren't happening now about how do we evaluate these automated agents? How do we manage them on an ongoing basis? And the only other vendor that I've really heard sort of talking about this today is Verint. in terms of how do we start to have AI to manage the AI to understand when it's underperforming? Because obviously,
Mm.
AI is an accelerant, right? If I'm doing something at the scale of AI, boy, I need to know pretty quickly whether it's working or not working, and have some
Yeah.
values in place there to guardrails in place there to either shut it off or do something different, right?
Yeah.
I'm not hearing those kind of conversations happening today about how am I managing this other than humans watching it, which is inherently not scalable. Are you?
Not really. And I would really like to see more vendors step out with sort of a vision of the future of work and how this can all play because like I said, in theory, a well designed humans and machines should enhance each other's strengths and mitigate their weaknesses. And look, humans aren't perfect, right? We're full of discrimination and bias and prejudice and all that kind of thing. And machines are actually pretty good at identifying patterns like that and pointing them out.
Mm-hmm.
So I happen to think that there's ways in which we could really design these systems better. And like you said, you figure out where the checkpoints are. Like, when do we need to come up for error, right? If you trust a machine to do certain things, what are the systems of accountability there? And like you said, to some extent, AI can manage AI, though I will say that I do get a little frustrated with the whole, this whole thing around like, oh, let's throw AI at the problem of AI. There's a limit to that too, but it's an important discussion. Eventually, we're going to get into a discussion around robot employees and do robots have rights and stuff like that. I don't think we're near that yet, but it's an interesting discussion to have. I think right now in the current economic headwinds, there's probably some more pressing issues like the effect of deep fakes on security for enterprises, as well as the future of democracy with important elections coming up. So I think there's some important things in the short term that are sort of beyond that, but I think it will become an issue, and I think it's an important topic. And so I'm glad that someone broached it, but like you said, it was done very awkwardly and they got pasted for it.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it's an interesting conversation to have because, at least in the HR space, we're trying to figure out how do we manage this? How do we think about reskilling employees? How do we have a more dynamic understanding of skills and actually what people do all day, right? So I can identify where those opportunities are to really push productivity. And I'm not sure we're there yet.
No, I mean the one cool thing is that, like, in some ways I think the AI readiness conversation is more interesting than the generative AI conversation, because to use these tools properly, there's so much that companies can do to improve the quality of their data. And, the talent and skills thing is a really, really good example because, again and again, when I look at these skills and talent stories, the companies that get it right just have a better skills ontology. They've figured out how to modernize that and make it so it's not, whenever I bring this up around Holler Mueller, he's always like, oh, those things go out of date and they're legacy traps,
They don't
you know?
have to. Though. Yeah.
But there's things that can be done to make those more like modern and resilient. And if you really have mapped out like the skills inside of your organization, then it gets really interesting to add AI to that mix, because now AI is going further than your humans can do, right? Because how busy is your HR team right now? Like, they're underwater.
Right.
So what if the AI is recommending course development for certain individuals based on their expressed aspirations or skills that have been identified by that? And so I think that's the interesting thing, is that when AI gets more exciting is when you've done some of that initial legwork. And so what I'm hopeful for customers is that they don't just bounce around between like overhype and disillusionment around AI, and stay steady around the data platform and analytics issue, and kind of press ahead with that and see, because then when the AI is mature enough for you, you'll be able to do something with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of work to be done kind of in the talent space that you talked about in terms of people kind of getting their data house in order. And everybody knows HR is overworked, right? And actually being able to have a meaningful
Yeah.
sort of talent and skills mapping. But if you look at like what some of the folks like Udemy are doing, where they're taking the skills graph and pointing it to particular courses in their content where
Yeah.
people can gain those skills. I mean, there's some real opportunities for HR, I think, to step it up. But I think, the same is true on the CRM and on the CCAS side. The folks that already had a good knowledge base have a lot greater potential opportunity with generative AI quickly than those who are doing sort of the tribal knowledge sticky note approach to actually training and onboarding agents.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because if you have a well-intentioned company that has got its ducks in a row, then the AI use cases get cool. And I just wrote the word glue down because I was thinking about how in an organization like that, AI could be the glue that ties a lot of things together inside your organization, right? And spots opportunities and matches between different individuals and interests and projects, and kind of helps to sort of push that forward, right? And alert people to opportunities. And to me, that's making the workforce better. Unfortunately, I think a lot of what we're seeing is more sort of premature headcount reductions and, okay, we can save on this or that by letting these bots. I mean, you hear anecdotes periodically about so-and-so doesn't have a call center anymore,
Right.
And it's like, okay, like, does that really make a lot of sense? Like, just to toss your call center, like when you could have come up with really clever ways of kind of saving VIP calls for really important problems, and then working in more bot-based interactions as well.
Yeah.
I imagine that it's going to come a day where I'm going to have a serious issue with a company, and I'm going to be dealing with a bot, and I won't be able to escalate to a human. I'm going to go through the roof, and I don't know what's going to happen. I really don't know what's going to happen that day.
I think everybody's going to have one of those experiences.
Yeah.
But I think Brent makes an important point. Most companies just I'm trying to read his comment here. Most people think throwing a new tech like Gen AI takes them off the hook for doing the real work. Absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, if we take the customer service example, if you don't have your knowledge base in order, if your agents are still learning by walking around, AI is not going to be able to do a lot for you other than adequate call summaries or case summaries, right?
Absolutely. And HR, of course, is a really interesting area for talking about AI, because there's some so-called, low-hanging fruit. Scared to even use the term because it's so cheesy. Like with things like job descriptions, right? Where it's like, seems pretty harmless. Yeah, it is public facing, but what could go wrong, right? But then you have stuff that's really, really serious, right? And then there's stuff in the middle like performance reviews, and there's hiring and screening, which is like lawsuit level stuff. And, which is reflected in the EU AI Act risk profile, where a lot of HR stuff is like right at the top of the high risk area. So it's really fascinating to think about how we're going to navigate that. But I have seen some companies show me some pretty cool stuff with things like AI generated performance reviews that I actually think could be pretty useful. But again, it's got to be really well designed with human in the loop. And then, oh God, I just used the phrase human in the loop. I've really been trying to purge that one too. That's one of my big resolutions for the rest of this year, is to find a different phrase for that. But making sure, because I worry a little bit that if it'll become too automatic. I think that's one of the dangers there, is like, if 8 of the last performance reviews look good, you start just boom, approve, right? And then the 9th one is way off, and it damages someone's career, and it was generated by a bot, and you were asleep at the switch.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think too, seeing what happens with OpenAI and ChatGPT, particularly if the markets continue to get hammered, is going to be very interesting. One of the other things you mentioned in your piece was about sort of customers owning metrics. And I think a lot of what companies are doing today, if they're successful, are like the little AI projects, right? They're like the call summary stuff. They're not the sort of big transformative stuff. Do you think we'll start to see more of that? Or is that still, my feeling is we're not going to see much of that we're still looking at next year, at least, before we start to see the really transformative stuff.
I think so. I think large enterprises in particular are going to tread very, very carefully. There's unresolved IP lawsuits that could affect stuff. They have a lot of customer and data privacy things they need to get right with vendors, which involve elaborate legal reviews and things like that. And I see a trust issue with adoption that's going to be very gradual. But on the edges, I think we'll see more of it, right? Because, like, so for example, sometimes I hear anecdotes from smaller, more aggressive firms about how this has really changed how they develop software, for example. And it's obvious why a smaller firm would have an easier time with that, because they're not dealing with the same high stakes, like CrowdStrike level stuff of updating, patches that affect millions, right? They're
Right.
building internal software, and so they can do things that other companies can't do. But in general, like, that's one of my biggest criticisms of this whole thing is that we lack imagination on the one hand and around what's possible, and then we lack sort of ROI accountability on the other. And what I really hope for customers, and why I encourage them to try to develop their own KPIs around this, is to take more ownership of this and to realize that I'm not really a techno optimist, but I will follow this wherever it goes. And if it's good, it's good, and I'll call it good. And one of the things that makes it good is when we have impact on it. It's not neutral. It's how we approach this technology. Are we going to enhance our humans, or are we going to fire them? I mean, you have to make some decisions around that and communicate that to your employees and figure out how you're going to do this. And look, I mean, some headcount shuffles are sometimes inevitable in organizations. I tend to think they often don't work out that well for companies. But the point is, whatever it is, there's got to be some clearly communicated strategy. And so I think we're going to see, unfortunately, a lot of co-pilots and a lot of productivity stuff. And we're not going to get too much energizing stories in the fall. But, hey, I mean, I still think it's sexy if I can talk with a customer about a live project. So I'll even talk with a customer about a co-pilot project if they're actually using it in a live production setting, to find out how that's changing their workflow, how it's helping, So I will document that, but it's not like, something I'm super excited about. Yeah. I mean, we've been having this productivity conversation in technology for a long, long time now. And I don't think that is enough here. I don't think that's going to be enough, especially when you look at some of the research that's coming out of the cost of this technology. I don't think it's going to be enough to be like, oh, this is your meeting companion, and it will issue your action items after your meeting. And is that what we really needed? I mean, is that what was really lacking in our lives at this point?
Yeah. I don't need another meeting note taker, so I don't have to pay attention to the meeting.
Right. Hey, don't get me wrong. I love my machine-generated transcripts. That's a beautiful thing. Like, I'm not going to knock some of that stuff. I use some of it,
Yeah.
but
There's got to be more there.
yeah, especially all the people that, whose intellectual property was trained and exploited to make these systems work. I think we need something more tantalizing, more revolutionary than that. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. It's okay. So we're almost to the half, which means it's crunch time.
Okay.
So, Jon, this is when Patrick wakes up
Oh, hello, Patrick. How we doing?
and asks you a few questions.
Cool.
Who is your favorite fictional hero?
Fictional hero. Oh my gosh, I didn't prepare for this. Gosh. Well, when I was a kid, it was Luke Skywalker, unplugging from the Force to to go with his own intuition. I think that was like kind of a big light bulb for me. I think I somehow sensed the technology that was coming, and that was going to be like a big thing in my life, was like how to find the humanity amidst the technology. So that was a big one for me.
Okay. Who's your favorite writer?
Ooh, interesting. I'm kind of like highbrow, lowbrow. Like I like Dostoevsky a lot,
Yeah.
but his work can be really difficult to penetrate at times. I grew up on Stephen King, so if you ask me like what my favorite book of all time would be, it would be The Stand.
Okay.
I just think it's a monumental story, but it's not fine art, but it's I think it's the art of keeping it real and telling stories and like creating characters. That's kind of what hooked me on King.
Yeah. The characters he creates are pretty
Amazing.
What are your favorite qualities in a person?
Oh, that's a great question. I like finding out who will step in the fire with me. Like, a lot of people in my life that I really like, I know deep down that we've never truly been in a situation where our friendship's been tested, right? And so I like finding out, and of course I have to reciprocate, right? I have to show that I have the same qualities, but I like knowing that about someone. And there's something so special when you've been through that with someone. Like, it changes your feeling about them forever when you know this person has my back in this world. I think that's the most precious feeling. That may be why I'm still close with some of my high school friends, because we were really up against it in a lot of really like intense situations. And like, I'll never like forget what I saw there. And no matter how much they've changed and I've changed, like, they earned something that you don't always get to earn every day, right? Because it's hard to like earn that when you're just like having meetings and going to events and stuff. Like, something's got to happen that presses you into a pressurized situation. Then we find out, and I love that reveal.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's quite surprising, by the way, who reveals themselves in both inspiring and disappointing ways. So that's
a
really
great answer. I think that's the best answer I've ever heard to that question.
Oh, thanks.
Final question. This is Patrick's favorite. If you could come back as any person or thing, what or who would you be?
Person or thing? Wow, that's really interesting.
Besides Patrick.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I haven't really given this any thought, but I might be up for Albert Camus in World War II, Paris, France.
Ooh.
Hanging out in cafes with Nazi occupation at the doorstep, like writing with all the passion and poetry he could muster.
Okay.
I think that might be cool. I mean, it would be really intense, but it would be cool. And I've never visited the Parisian cafes where he hung out either, so that's on my like serious bucket list. So
we'll have to plan a trip.
Yeah, I know. I really need to do that because I've been in Europe quite a bit, but I just haven't made that happen, and I got to do it because I got to just have.
Well, Unleash is just around the corner.
There you go.
Jon, thank you so much for taking time on your vacation to join me and Patrick today and share your insights and your cheesiness. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's really fun to talk about this with someone who's spent so much time researching and thinking about it like that. That's a real pleasure, and that was the reason why I kept this commitment, because I just this is the kind of conversation needs to happen more often. So thanks for having me.
No, thank you.
And of course, how can you turn down Patrick?
Today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks all.
Thanks.